They've surrounded us. Human, she whispered, trembling. Good, he growled. Now I don't even have to aim. The twin red suns of Azkar beat down mercilessly on the scorched desert planet, casting long shadows across the rippling dunes. The heat was oppressive, rising in visible waves from the sand surface, distorting the horizon into a hazy mirage. This was the Desolation Belt, a forsaken stretch of wasteland where only the most resilient or desperate would dare to tread. Lyra Cassian crouched behind a jagged rock formation, her uniform torn and stained with blood that had dried to a rust-colored crust. The intelligence officer of the Celestial Alliance winced as she shifted her weight, the movement sending fresh pain shooting through her injured leg. The wound was deep, metal shrapnel still embedded in her flesh from the ambush that had destroyed their scout ship 3 days earlier. Beside her, Corin Thales maintained an eerie calm. The Earthborn tactical engineer sat with his back against the scorching stone, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Despite being held in an iron cage for the past day, his demeanor betrayed no fear, only a calculating intensity that seemed at odds with their dire situation. "How many?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the distant war chants of the Boran warriors. Lyra peered cautiously around the edge of their meager shelter. 3 flanks. At least 30 warriors on each side. They're using the pincer formation. She ducked back as a projectile whistled overhead, exploding in a shower of sand several yards away. Left flank has the high ground on the plateau. Right flank is blocking our only escape route. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the red glow of the setting suns. We're trapped. The Boran tribe was notorious throughout the sector. Savage warriors with a complex religious system centered around blood sacrifice and sand rituals. Their 2-meter-tall frames were adorned with bone trophies from fallen enemies, and their war paint glimmered with metallic particles harvested from the desert itself. The chieftain, distinguishable by the red dragon skull helmet that crowned his massive frame, stood at the center of the advancing formation, bellowing commands in their guttural language. "They've surrounded us. Human," she whispered, trembling, her usually steady hand gripping her blaster so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Corin's response was unexpected. A slow smile spread across his dust-caked face, his eyes never leaving the advancing enemy. "Good," he growled. "Now I don't even have to aim." Lyra stared at him in disbelief, wondering if the desert heat had finally broken his mind. But there was something in his expression, a certainty that made her hesitate before dismissing his words as delirium. "What are you talking about?" she hissed. "There are nearly 100 of them closing in, and we're backed against a cliff wall with no weapons except your engineering tools and my half-charged blaster." Corin finally turned to meet her gaze. "Exactly. They're pushing us exactly where I want them to." "And where is that?" "The resonance point." Seeing her confusion, he continued. "Remember when they separated us yesterday? When they put me in that cage and took you to their bone temple?" Lyra nodded, the memory of her interrogation still fresh and painful. "I wasn't idle." Corin's voice dropped lower. "This isn't the first time I've encountered the Boran. 2 years ago, they slaughtered my entire engineering team on Outpost Delta. 15 good people, butchered for their bone collection." His eyes hardened. "Since then, I've been studying them, learning their patterns, their formations, their weaknesses." "So you plan to be captured?" Lyra's disbelief was palpable. "Not exactly planned, but I was prepared." He reached into his belt, revealing a small device no larger than his thumb. "This is a sonic emitter I built. It's calibrated to the exact frequency that destabilizes the sandstone in these cliffs." Lyra's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You're going to collapse the cliff." "Partially," he corrected. "Just enough to create chaos. But that's only the beginning." He pointed to the darkening sky. "What comes out at night on this part of Azkar?" A chill ran down Lyra's spine despite the desert heat. "The Zagmoth," she whispered. Nocturnal predators. With an acute sensitivity to certain sonic frequencies, Corin added, a grim satisfaction in his voice. The same frequencies my device is calibrated to emit. The realization of his plan struck her with full force. You're going to bring down the cliff and summon the Zagmoth at the same time. Exactly. Corin checked the device one more time. The Boran are pushing us toward the cliff because they think they're herding us into a trap. They don't realize that their precious formation has a fatal flaw when used in this particular terrain. But if you collapse the cliff while we're against it... I've calculated the stress points, he interrupted. The major collapse will be 50 meters to our left, where the left flank is positioned on the plateau. The rest will be controlled mini-slides, creating a staggered path we can use to climb while they're distracted by the Zagmoth. Lyra studied him with new eyes. The man she had initially dismissed as just another civilian engineer suddenly appeared in a different light. A tactician who had been several steps ahead of their captors from the beginning. The war chants grew louder, the rhythmic thumping of spears against shields creating a primal soundtrack to their approaching doom. The chieftain's voice rose above the others, invoking the name of their sand deity in a prayer that promised blood and suffering. When? Lyra asked, checking her blaster's charge, barely enough for 3 shots. When they reach the third rock formation, Corin replied, pointing to a distinctive outcropping about 30 meters ahead. That's when their formation will be most vulnerable. The left flank will be highest, completely exposed on the plateau. The right flank will be committed to blocking the canyon pass, and the center will be directly in the path of the cliff collapse, Lyra finished. Corin nodded. And the Zagmoth. The Boran warriors advanced in perfect synchronization, their discipline evident in every calculated step. The sinking suns cast long shadows that stretched like dark fingers across the sand, reaching toward Lyra and Corin as if nature itself was conspiring with the Boran. How did you even get that device past their searches? Lyra asked, her tactical mind still processing the improbability of their situation. A glint of mischief flashed in Corin's eyes. They searched me, but they didn't understand what they were looking for. To them, it looked like a religious token. I made sure of that by engraving it with symbols similar to their own. They thought it was a prayer stone and handed it right back. Despite their dire circumstances, Lyra felt a reluctant smile tug at her lips. Clever. 2 days ago, while you were recovering from the crash, I snuck into their camp, Corin continued, his voice low and measured. Used my hacking skills to access their patrol schedules, mapped their movements, studied their routines. Everything about the Boran is built on patterns. Religious, military, social. Break the pattern. Break the Boran, Lyra concluded. The warriors were nearing the third rock formation now. The chieftain raised his bone staff, and the chanting intensified. The entire tribe seemed to vibrate with bloodlust, their painted faces twisted in anticipation of the kill. Get ready, Corin whispered, his finger hovering over the device. When I activate this, we'll have approximately 20 seconds before the cliff begins to collapse, and another 40 before the Zagmoth arrive. We need to move fast. Lyra tightened the makeshift bandage around her leg. I'll slow you down. No, you won't, he said with unexpected gentleness. Because I'm not leaving without you. Alliance protocol or not. We both make it out or neither does. Before she could respond, the chieftain let out a piercing war cry. The Boran warriors surged forward, their formation maintaining perfect precision even as they broke into a run. Now! Corin pressed the device, and a high-pitched tone, just at the edge of human hearing, emanated from it. He slipped it into a crack in the cliff face behind them, then grabbed Lyra's arm. Move left, along the base of the cliff. Stay close to the wall. They began to move, Lyra limping but determined. Corin supporting her weight while keeping his eyes on the advancing warriors. For a moment, nothing happened, and Lyra felt a stab of doubt. Had the device failed? Had Corin's calculations been wrong? Then she felt it. A subtle vibration beneath her feet. A tremor that quickly intensified. The sound came next. A low rumble that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. The Boran warriors faltered, their perfect formation wavering as uncertainty rippled through their ranks. The chieftain bellowed orders, trying to maintain discipline, but it was too late. With a deafening crack, the cliff face to their left began to collapse. Massive chunks of sandstone broke free, tumbling down onto the plateau where the left flank had been positioned. Screams replaced war chants as warriors were crushed beneath the avalanche. "Keep moving," Corin urged, guiding Lyra along the base of the cliff, away from the main collapse. The path should be forming ahead of us. Just as he had predicted, smaller rock slides were creating a staggered series of ledges, treacherous but climbable. The Boran formation had completely disintegrated into chaos. The right flank abandoned their position blocking the escape route, rushing to aid their fallen comrades, while the center scattered in confusion. And then came the Zagmoth. They descended from the darkening sky like living nightmares, leathery wings spanning 3 meters, bodies covered in striped fur that absorbed light rather than reflected it, making them seem like mobile shadows. Their claws gleamed in the dying sunlight as they swooped down on the disorganized Boran warriors. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The disciplined fighting force that had been the scourge of the Desolation Belt for generations dissolved into a panicked mob. Some warriors fired wildly into the air, others fled in terror, while a few stood frozen, paralyzed by the sight of their worst fears made manifest. The climbing path. Corin pointed to the series of ledges created by the controlled rock slides. "Can you make it?" Lyra gritted her teeth against the pain in her leg. "Watch me!" Together, they began to climb, using the chaos below as cover for their escape. The metal shrapnel in Lyra's leg scraped against bone with each movement, sending waves of agony through her body. But she refused to slow their pace. Corin climbed beside her, one hand always ready to catch her if she slipped. From their elevated position, they could see the full extent of the devastation below. The Boran warriors, once so fearsome, were now scattered and vulnerable. The Zagmoth showed no mercy, diving again and again to snatch warriors in their massive claws. The chieftain, Lyra pointed to a solitary figure standing amidst the chaos, his red dragon skull helmet unmistakable even in the fading light. Unlike his warriors, he neither fled nor fought. Instead, he stared directly up at Lyra and Corin, his face a mask of hatred and something else, a grudging respect for the trap that had been sprung on his people. "He understands," Corin said softly. "He knows this wasn't just bad luck or angry gods. He knows someone outthought him." "Will he come after us?" Corin shook his head. "Not tonight. And tomorrow. This place will be a graveyard. The Boran are superstitious. They won't return to a place where their warriors died in such numbers." They continued climbing, reaching a narrow ledge that ran along the cliff face, leading away from the Boran camp. The suns had fully set now, leaving only the pale blue light of Askar's 3 moons to guide their way. Below them, the sounds of battle and death gradually faded into the distance. "You didn't just get lucky with a sonic device," Lyra said as they paused to rest. "You've been planning this for a long time." "Since the day I buried what was left of my team," Corin confirmed, his voice neutral, but his eyes reflecting old pain. "Revenge is a powerful motivator for research." "And now?" Lyra asked. "Is it finished?" Corin was silent for a long moment, watching the distant figures of Zagmoth circling above the Boran camp. "No," he finally said. "Now we survive. We find our way back to the downed Alliance ship, rescue any survivors, and complete the mission." "Just like that? After 2 years of planning your revenge?" "The revenge was never the point," Corin said, surprising her. "Justice was, and understanding. understanding that brute force can always be defeated by superior thinking. He tapped his temple. The strongest weapon is in here, not in your blaster or their spears. They set off again, following the ledge as it gradually descended toward the desert floor on the far side of the cliff. The night air grew colder, the temperature dropping rapidly, as it always did in desert environments. Lyra's leg had gone from burning pain to a worrying numbness. "How far to the downed ship?" she asked, her voice growing weaker. Corin pointed to a distant glint on the horizon, the reflection of moonlight on metal. "About 5 kilometers. Can you make it?" "Do I have a choice?" She attempted a smile, but it turned into a grimace as she took another step. "Actually, yes." Corin surprised her by stopping and kneeling with his back to her. "Climb on." "Don't be ridiculous. I'm too heavy for you to carry that distance." "Probably," he agreed. "But I can at least get you part of the way. The alternative is that your wound gets worse, infection sets in, and I end up trying to explain to your Alliance superiors why I left their intelligence officer to die in the desert." Lyra hesitated, then relented, carefully positioning herself on his back. Corin stood with a grunt, adjusting to her weight before continuing along the path. "Tell me something," she said, after they had traveled in silence for some time. "Why didn't you tell me about your plan earlier, when we were first captured?" "Would you have believed me?" Corin asked. "A civilian engineer claiming he could defeat an entire Boran war party with a sonic device and some well-timed rock slides?" Lyra considered this. "Probably not," she admitted. "I would have thought you were delirious or desperate." "Exactly. Sometimes the best strategy is to let people underestimate you, enemies and allies alike." As they made their slow progress across the desert floor, Lyra found herself reevaluating her initial impressions of Corin Thales. She had dismissed him as just another civilian contractor, valuable for his technical skills, but a liability in combat situations. Now she understood that his mind was a weapon, more formidable than any she had been trained to use. The journey to the downed ship was arduous. Corin carried Lyra as far as he could before his strength gave out. And then they continued together, her arm around his shoulders for support. The cold desert night was punctuated by distant cries, some human, some decidedly not, reminders that they were not the only ones fighting for survival in this hostile environment. "There," Corin pointed as they crested a small rise. The ship, the Alliance scout vessel, lay half buried in sand, its sleek silver hull reflecting the moonlight. One wing had been completely sheared off in the crash, and the main body was cracked open like an egg, spilling internal components across the desert floor. "Life signs?" Lyra asked, her training reasserting itself despite her weakened condition. Corin pulled a small device from his pocket, not the sonic emitter, but a standard Alliance emergency transponder. Faint, but present. At least 3 distinct signatures. "Survivors," Lyra breathed, hope kindling in her chest. They approached the wreckage cautiously, aware that the Boran might have posted guards. But the ship appeared abandoned, the only movement coming from tattered pieces of equipment fluttering in the night breeze. "Hello," Corin called out as they neared the largest section of intact hull. "Alliance personnel? We're friendlies." A tense moment of silence followed. Then a weak voice responded from within the wreckage. "Identify yourselves." "Intelligence Officer Lyra Cassian and Tactical Engineer Corin Thales," Lyra called back. "We were separated during the attack." More silence. Then the sound of metal scraping against metal. A panel in the side of the hull slid open, revealing a narrow space beyond. A face appeared in the opening, gaunt, bloodied, but familiar. "Captain Voss," Lyra exclaimed, recognizing the ship's commander. "Cassian," Captain Serrana Voss acknowledged, her voice raspy from dehydration. "We thought you were dead." Her eyes shifted to Corin. "Both of you." "It was a close thing," Lyra admitted. "The Boran had us surrounded." "Had," Voss noted, picking up on the past tense. Not anymore? Corin's expression remained neutral. They encountered some local wildlife. Voss didn't press for details. Get inside, she ordered, stepping back from the opening. We've set up a defensive position. Not much, but better than being exposed. They squeezed through the narrow opening into what had once been the cargo hold of the scout ship. The space had been transformed into a makeshift medical bay, with emergency lighting casting everything in a pale blue glow. 2 other Alliance officers lay on improvised beds, fashioned from crash webbing and equipment cases. Both were unconscious, their chests rising and falling with shallow breaths. Turn and Mally, Voss explained, gesturing to the wounded. Turn's got a punctured lung, and Mally took shrapnel to the abdomen. I've done what I can with the medkit, but... She trailed off, the inadequacy of her efforts evident in the pallor of the injured officers. Let me see, Corin said, moving toward them. I have some field medical training. While Corin examined the wounded, Voss turned to Lyra. Report, officer. What happened after the crash? Lyra gave a concise summary of their capture, imprisonment, and escape, careful to credit Corin's plan for their survival. As she spoke, she watched Voss's expression shift from skepticism to grudging respect. A sonic device that triggers rock slides and attracts predators, Voss mused, when Lyra had finished. Creative. Effective, Lyra corrected. The Born were completely overwhelmed. Voss nodded slowly. Good. Those savages have been a thorn in Alliance operations for too long. She gestured to Lyra's injured leg. You should let Thales look at that when he's done with the others. Lyra glanced down at her wound, now crusted with blood and sand. It can wait. What's our situation here? Communications? Supplies? Comms are down, Voss replied grimly. The main array was destroyed in the crash. We've been trying to boost the emergency beacon, but without proper tools, she shrugged. As for supplies, we have 3 days of emergency rations and about 2 days of water. Medical supplies are critically low. And the mission data? Lyra asked, lowering her voice. Voss tapped her temple. Secure. The Boran didn't find us here, and even if they had, they wouldn't have known what to look for. From across the hold, Corin spoke without looking up from his work on the wounded officers. They would have known exactly what to look for. The Boran aren't just savages. They're intelligent enemies with a sophisticated understanding of Alliance protocols. They've been capturing and studying Alliance technology for years. Voss bristled. With all due respect, Thales, I don't need a lecture on enemy capabilities from a civilian contractor. No, Corin agreed, his tone mild, but his words pointed. What you need is to recognize when your preconceptions are dangerous. The Boran aren't just bone-wearing primitives. They're adaptive adversaries who learn from each encounter. Before Voss could respond, one of the wounded officers, Turn, began to convulse. Corin immediately shifted his attention, stabilizing the man's head and checking his airway. He's going into shock, Corin announced. I need the medical kit. Voss handed over the depleted kit, and Lyra moved to assist, holding Turn steady while Corin administered emergency treatment. For several tense minutes, they worked in silence, the only sounds the ragged breathing of the injured man and the whisper of the desert wind outside the hull. Finally, Turn's convulsions subsided, and his breathing steadied. Corin sat back, exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. He's stable, he reported. For now. But he needs proper medical attention soon, as does Mally. He turned to Lyra. Your turn. Despite her protests, Corin insisted on treating her leg wound. As he carefully removed the makeshift bandage, Lyra bit back a cry of pain. The metal shrapnel was still embedded deep in her calf, the surrounding tissue inflamed and beginning to show signs of infection. This is going to hurt, Corin warned, preparing a sterilized pair of forceps from the medical kit. Lyra nodded, bracing herself. Just do it. With precise movements, Corin extracted the shrapnel, a jagged piece of hull plating about the size of a credit chip. Lyra's vision swam with pain, but she remained conscious. Her jaw clenched so tightly, she feared her teeth might crack. Good, Corin murmured as he cleaned and dressed the wound. No major arterial damage. The infection is superficial. Caught it early enough. Will she be able to walk? Voss asked, her tone professional but her eyes betraying genuine concern. Not for long distances, Corin replied. Not yet. The muscle needs time to heal. Voss nodded, accepting this assessment. Then we stay put and continue boosting the emergency beacon. Someone will pick up the signal eventually. Eventually might be too late for Turn and Mally, Corin pointed out. And we don't know if the Boran will regroup and come looking for us. What do you suggest? Voss challenged. We can't carry 2 unconscious officers across the desert, especially with Cassian injured. Corin was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. We don't have to, he finally said. We just need to boost the signal enough for a rescue ship to pinpoint our location. Which is exactly what we've been trying to do, Voss said, frustration edging into her voice. Without the right tools, Corin agreed. But I might be able to improvise something. He looked around the cargo hold, mentally cataloging the available equipment. If I can salvage parts from the ship's communication array and combine them with my own tools, I might be able to construct a signal amplifier. Might? Voss repeated skeptically. It's better than waiting for death or rescue, whichever comes first. Lyra interjected. Let him try, Captain. Voss considered this, then gave a sharp nod. Do it. What do you need? Access to the bridge, for starters, Corin replied. And any working power cells you've managed to salvage? For the next several hours. Corin worked tirelessly, scavenging components from various parts of the wrecked ship and combining them with tools and devices from his own engineering kit. Lyra assisted as much as her injury allowed, handing him tools and holding pieces in place while he connected them. Dawn broke over the desert, the twin red suns rising to begin another scorching day. The temperature inside the hull rose rapidly, turning the makeshift shelter into an oven. Voss distributed their meager water rations, insisting that the injured receive priority. How's it coming? She asked, watching Corin connect delicate wiring in what looked like a chaotic assemblage of parts. Almost there, he replied without looking up. I've reconfigured the emergency beacon to operate on a different frequency, one that the Alliance monitors more closely for priority distress calls. Won't that require command authorization? Voss asked, frowning. Corin smiled slightly. Normally, yes, but I'm not exactly following standard Alliance protocols here. You're hacking our own systems, Voss realized, her expression hardening. I prefer to think of it as creative problem-solving in a life-or-death situation, Corin countered. Besides, what's the alternative? Wait until Turn and Mally die, then use their ration allocations to extend our own survival by another day? Voss had no answer for that. She returned to monitoring the perimeter, her posture rigid with disapproval, but her silence tacit permission. By midday, Corin had completed his makeshift signal amplifier. The device was ugly but functional, a cobbled-together array of communication components, power cells, and parts from his own engineering tools. This should boost our signal enough to reach the nearest Alliance outpost, he explained, as he made final adjustments. But it'll drain our remaining power cells quickly. We'll have maybe 6 hours of transmission time before everything goes dead. 6 hours is better than nothing, Lyra said encouragingly. Corin nodded, then activated the device. A high-pitched whine filled the cargo hold, followed by a series of rapid beeps as the emergency beacon connected with the amplifier. Now we wait, he said, sitting back against the hull. The hours crawled by, marked by the steadily increasing heat and the labored breathing of the wounded. Lyra drifted in and out of consciousness, her body finally succumbing to exhaustion now that the immediate danger had passed. Each time she woke, She saw Corin in the same position, alert, watching, his eyes constantly moving between the injured officers, the amplifier, and the small opening that served as their only exit. It was during one of these brief periods of wakefulness that she heard it, a distant humming sound, growing steadily louder. "Engines," she mumbled, struggling to sit up. Corin was already moving, peering through the opening. "Alliance rescue shuttle," he confirmed, relief evident in his voice. "They received our signal." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. The rescue team, led by Commander Sarana Voss's superior officer, efficiently transferred the wounded to the shuttle's medical bay, where advanced treatment began immediately. Lyra found herself on a medical cot, a cool sensation spreading through her leg as regenerative compounds were injected directly into the wound. "You'll make a full recovery," the medical officer assured her. "Though you might set off security scanners for a while. There were trace amounts of metal still embedded in the tissue." Lyra nodded absently. Her attention focused on Corin, who stood apart from the others, speaking quietly with a senior Alliance official. Their conversation appeared intense, with Corin doing most of the talking, while the official listened with growing concern. When the shuttle lifted off, leaving the wreckage of the scout ship behind, Lyra finally lost her battle with exhaustion. She slipped into a deep, dreamless sleep. Her last conscious thought a question. What had Corin been telling the official, and why had it seemed so urgent? She awoke in a medical bay, aboard an Alliance cruiser. The familiar hum of FTL engines vibrating subtly through the bulkhead. Her leg was bandaged, but pain-free, and a quick self-assessment revealed that her other minor injuries had also been treated. "Welcome back," a voice said from beside her bed. Lyra turned to see Corin sitting in a visitor's chair, his appearance transformed by a clean uniform and the absence of desert grime. He looked younger, she realized, without the layer of dust and desperation that had covered him on Azkar. "How long was I out?" she asked, her voice raspy from disuse. 26 hours, he replied. "The medical team induced a healing coma to accelerate your recovery." Lyra nodded, familiar with the procedure. "The others, Tern and Mally?" "Alive and stable. Mally will need reconstructive surgery when we reach Outpost Gamma, but the prognosis is good." "And Captain Voss?" "Debriefing with Alliance Command. They're particularly interested in her account of our encounter with the Boran." Lyra studied him for a moment. "And your account? I saw you talking with that official on the shuttle." Corin's expression remained neutral. "I provided a full report on the tactical situation in the Desolation Belt, including my assessment of Boran capabilities and strategies." "Just that?" A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, crossed his face. "I may have also suggested some modifications to Alliance protocols regarding engagement with indigenous warrior cultures." Lyra couldn't help but smile. "I bet that went over well." "About as well as you'd expect," he admitted. "The Alliance military isn't known for its receptiveness to criticism from civilian contractors. And yet, here you are, alive, unrestrained, and apparently free to visit patients in the medical bay. Let's just say that surviving a Boran war party with nothing but a sonic device and some geological knowledge earns you a certain amount of latitude." Lyra attempted to sit up, wincing slightly, as her healing muscles protested. Corin immediately moved to assist her, adjusting her pillows to provide better support. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Not just for this, for everything. We wouldn't have survived without your plan." Corin shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. It was simple tactical analysis. The Boran rely too heavily on their formations and religious intimidation. Once you understand their patterns, they become predictable. "Simple," Lyra repeated skeptically. "Is that why it took you 2 years to develop?" "The research took time," he acknowledged. "Understanding an enemy isn't just about knowing their weapons or tactics. It's about comprehending their worldview, their values, their fears. The Boran aren't just warriors. They're believers in a complex religious system that shapes everything they do, including pushing us toward that cliff. Lyra realized. It wasn't just a tactical decision. It had religious significance. Corin nodded. In their belief system, high places are sacred to their sand deity. By forcing us up against the cliff, they weren't just trapping us physically. They were offering us as sacrifices, which you turned against them. I used their expectations against them, he corrected. The cliff, the Zagmoth. These were elements of their environment that they thought they understood and controlled. When those elements turned against them, it wasn't just a tactical defeat. It was a religious crisis. Lyra considered this, seeing the events on Azkar in a new light. That's why the chieftain looked at us the way he did. He wasn't just recognizing a military defeat. He was witnessing the repudiation of his gods. Corin finished. At least, that's how he would interpret it. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the quiet beeping of medical monitors and the distant voices of ship personnel passing in the corridor outside. What happens now? Lyra finally asked. We'll reach Outpost Gamma in about 18 hours. You and the others will receive full medical evaluations, then likely be reassigned once you're cleared for duty. And you, back to civilian contracts? Corin hesitated, something unreadable flashing across his face. Actually, I've been offered a position with Alliance Intelligence. Your commanding officer was apparently impressed by my unconventional problem-solving approaches, as she put it. You're joining the Alliance? Lyra couldn't hide her surprise. Corin had always struck her as fiercely independent, reluctant to be bound by military hierarchies and regulations. Consulting, he clarified. A specialized role analyzing emerging threats in the outer sectors, with particular focus on indigenous warrior cultures like the Baran. You'll be good at it, Lyra said sincerely. Perhaps. His expression turned thoughtful. The real question is whether the Alliance will be good at listening. Military organizations tend to prefer solutions that involve bigger guns and better armor, not anthropological analysis and psychological warfare. After what happened on Azkar, they'd be fools not to listen. Corin smiled, a genuine smile this time, not the grim expression he had worn in the desert. Then let's hope fools are in short supply among Alliance Command. A medical officer entered the bay, interrupting their conversation. After a brief examination of Lyra's vital signs and wound healing, he pronounced her recovery proceeding excellently. Another 12 hours of rest, and you should be cleared for light duty, he informed her. Though I'd recommend avoiding desert planets for a while. He nodded to Corin. Don't tire my patient, Engineer Thales. She needs rest. After the medical officer departed, Corin rose from his chair. I should go. There are still reports to complete, and I need to prepare for the debriefing at Outpost Gamma. Corin, Lyra called as he turned to leave. He paused, looking back at her. What you said in the desert about revenge not being the point, did you mean that? He was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant, as if seeing again the Baran camp in chaos. The warriors scattered and broken by his carefully laid trap. Yes, he finally said. Revenge is hollow. It doesn't bring back the dead, and it doesn't prevent the next tragedy. Understanding does that. Understanding and adaptation. He met her gaze directly. My team died because they didn't understand the Baran. I made sure that wouldn't happen to us. And now, what do you understand now that it's over? That it's never really over, he replied softly. The Boran will adapt to what happened. They'll develop new tactics, new religious interpretations to explain their defeat, and will need to adapt in turn. He gestured to the ship around them. That's the real battle, not ships and weapons, but minds and ideas constantly evolving in response to each other. With that, he left, the door sliding shut behind him. Lyra settled back against her pillows, considering his words. In all her years of Alliance military training, No instructor had ever articulated warfare in quite those terms, as an evolutionary process of minds rather than a simple contest of force. By the time the Alliance cruiser docked at Outpost Gamma 18 hours later, Lyra had been cleared for light duty. She stood on her own power, her uniform crisp and her posture military straight, despite the lingering stiffness in her injured leg, as she disembarked alongside the other survivors of the scout ship. Outpost Gamma hummed with activity, a major Alliance installation on the edge of the outer sectors, serving as both military headquarters and diplomatic hub for interactions with the various species and cultures that inhabited the frontier worlds. The docking bay alone was a testament to the diversity of the region, with vessels of a dozen different designs arranged in orderly rows, their crews representing an equal variety of species and affiliations. A junior officer met them at the disembarkation point, directing the wounded to the medical facility for final evaluations and the others to the command center for debriefing. Lyra found herself walking alongside Captain Voss, whose expression was uncharacteristically pensive. "Something on your mind, Captain?" Lyra ventured. Voss glanced at her. Then, back to the bustling corridor ahead. "I've been reviewing Thales' report on the Boran engagement," she admitted. "His analysis of their cultural and religious structures is illuminating." "He spent 2 years studying them," Lyra reminded her. "After what happened to his engineering team." "Yes, I am aware of the Outpost Delta massacre," Voss said grimly. 15 casualties, all civilian contractors. Alliance Command classified it as an unfortunate incident of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Corin saw it differently. Evidently, Voss's tone was neutral, but her expression suggested internal conflict. His report argues that the massacre wasn't random violence, but a calculated religious ritual, a technology cleansing, as he calls it. The Boran apparently believe that certain forms of technology are offensive to their sand deity, which explains why they specifically targeted the engineering team, Lyra realized. Voss nodded. According to Thales, the Boran have a sophisticated understanding of which technologies pose the greatest threat to their way of life. They don't just attack indiscriminately. They prioritize targets based on this religious framework. And Alliance Command missed this completely, Lyra said, unable to keep a note of criticism from her voice. "We categorize the Boran as primitive hostiles," Voss acknowledged, surprising Lyra with her candor. "Standard classification for pre-spaceflight indigenous warrior cultures. Our engagement protocols reflect that assessment. Overwhelming force, minimal cultural consideration. Protocols that nearly got us killed," Lyra pointed out. "Yes," Voss agreed simply. "Which is why Thales' consulting position was approved with unprecedented speed. Alliance Command recognizes when its assessments have been proven inadequate." They reached the command center, a vast chamber dominated by holographic displays showing various sectors of Alliance space. Officers moved purposefully between workstations, their conversations creating a constant murmur beneath the electronic chimes and alerts of the monitoring systems. At the center of it all stood Corin Thales, surrounded by senior Alliance officials. He was gesturing to a holographic representation of what appeared to be the Desolation Belt, with particular emphasis on a series of highlighted locations throughout the region. "That's the briefing on Boran sacred sites," Voss explained, following Lyra's gaze. "Thales has identified 17 locations that hold particular religious significance to the Boran. Alliance operations are being rerouted to avoid those areas whenever possible." "That's not standard Alliance procedure," Lyra said carefully. "No," Voss agreed. "It's not. But neither is losing scout ships and personnel to what we previously dismissed as primitive hostiles." She straightened her uniform. "I need to join the briefing. You should report to medical for your final clearance." Lyra nodded, watching as Voss approached the group surrounding Corin. Before heading to the medical facility, she lingered a moment longer, observing the scene. Korin appeared completely at ease among the senior officials, his hands moving confidently as he explained something about the holographic display. The officials listened with expressions ranging from skepticism to intense interest, but all were clearly paying attention. It was a far cry from the dust-covered prisoner she had first encountered in the Boran camp. Yet in many ways, it was the same man, calculating, observant, several steps ahead of those around him. The difference was that now, others were beginning to recognize what she had learned in the desert, that Korin Thales' mind was a weapon more powerful than any in the Alliance arsenal. 3 days later, fully cleared for duty and assigned to a new intelligence-gathering mission, Lyra found Korin in one of Outpost Gamma's observation lounges. He stood alone by the viewport, watching the stars beyond the station's defensive perimeter. The eternal night of space stretched before him, punctuated by the distant glow of Uskar's twin suns, tiny red pinpricks from this distance, but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. "Admiring the view?" Lyra asked, moving to stand beside him. "Contemplating distance," he replied without turning. "From here, Askar looks peaceful, just another point of light in the void. It's easy to forget the conflicts raging on its surface." "Perspective matters," Lyra agreed. "Up close, all you see is the battle in front of you. From a distance, you can see the patterns." Korin glanced at her, a hint of approval in his expression. "Exactly. And patterns are what matter in the long run. Individual battles come and go, but the patterns remain, evolving, adapting, but fundamentally consistent." "Is that what you'll be doing in your new role? Looking for patterns?" "Among other things." He turned fully to face her. "I understand you've received a new assignment." Lyra nodded. "Intelligence gathering in the Scorpion Nebula. There's concern about increased Boran activity in that sector." "The tribal expansion," Korin said, unsurprised. "It's their traditional response to a significant defeat. When one hunting ground proves dangerous, they seek new territories, new resources to maintain their strength." "You predicted this?" "It was in my report," he confirmed. "The Boran aren't defeated. They're adapting, just as we are. The dance continues." Lyra studied him curiously. "You almost sound like you respect them." "I do," Korin admitted. "Not their methods or their violence, but their resilience, their cultural cohesion. They've survived in one of the harshest environments in the sector for generations, without the benefits of our technology. That demands a certain respect. Even after what they did to your team, to us?" Korin's gaze returned to the viewport, to the distant red pinpricks of Oskar's suns. "Understanding doesn't require approval. I can recognize their strengths while opposing their aggression." He paused, then added, "In many ways, they're a mirror, showing us aspects of ourselves we prefer not to acknowledge." "Such as?" "Our reliance on force rather than understanding. Our tendency to dismiss what we don't immediately comprehend as primitive or irrational." He turned back to her, his expression earnest. "The Alliance prides itself on diversity and inclusion. Yet we categorized an entire culture as hostile primitives without making any real effort to understand their motivations or worldview." Lyra couldn't argue with that assessment. Her own training had emphasized tactical responses to various threat categories, with minimal attention paid to the cultural contexts that created those threats in the first place. "So what's the solution?" she asked. "We can't exactly invite the Boran to join the Alliance diplomatic corps?" "No," Korin agreed with a slight smile. "But we can approach them, and others like them, with greater awareness. Recognize that their actions, however violent or incomprehensible they may seem to us, follow internal logics and values that make perfect sense within their cultural framework." "And that helps us how exactly?" "It helps us predict their movements, anticipate their responses, avoid unnecessary conflicts, and, when conflict is unavoidable, engage in ways that achieve our objectives with minimal casualties on both sides." Like collapsing a cliff and summoning predators? Lyra asked, raising an eyebrow. Corin acknowledged the point with a tilt of his head. Tactical applications will vary based on circumstances. The principle remains consistent. Understand before you engage. A comfortable silence fell between them as they both turned to look out at the stars. After a moment, Lyra spoke again, her voice quieter. I'm shipping out tomorrow. The intelligence mission in the Scorpion Nebula. I know, Corin replied. I'll be joining you, actually. Alliance Command wants me to field test some of my theoretical approaches to Boran cultural engagement. Lyra couldn't hide her surprise, or her pleasure at the news. You're coming on the mission, as a consultant. As a full member of the intelligence team, he corrected. My civilian contractor status has been temporarily suspended in favor of a specialized field agent designation. They're making you a spy, Lyra translated, amused. I prefer cultural interpreter, Corin said with mock dignity. But essentially, yes. Well, cultural interpreter Thales, Lyra said, extending her hand formally. I look forward to working with you again. Corin took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he turned it over and placed something in her palm, a small device similar to the sonic emitter he had used on Azkar, but with subtle modifications. What's this? She asked, examining it. Insurance, he replied simply. Calibrated to a different frequency than the last one, effective against a different type of terrain. Just in case we find ourselves surrounded again. Lyra closed her fingers around the device, understanding the gesture for what it was. Not just a tactical advantage, but a symbol of trust and partnership. Let's hope we don't need it, she said, pocketing the device. Hope for the best. Prepare for the worst, Corin agreed. Though if we do find ourselves surrounded. A ghost of his desert smile appeared. Lyra finished the thought for him, returning the smile. At least we won't have to aim. The observation lounge fell silent once more as they stood side by side, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, among those distant points of light, the Boran were adapting, evolving, preparing for the next encounter. And so, Lyra realized, were they? Not just with better weapons or stronger defenses, but with deeper understanding and more nuanced approaches. The real battle, as Corin had said, was not of ships and weapons, but of minds and ideas, constantly evolving in response to each other. And in that eternal dance of adaptation, perhaps there was hope for something beyond mere survival, something approaching genuine understanding across the vast gulfs that separated the myriad cultures of the galaxy. As Azkar's twin suns faded from view with the rotation of the station, Lyra found herself looking forward to the mission ahead with a new perspective, one that valued understanding as much as victory, patterns as much as power. It was a perspective that might just change the way the Alliance engaged with the frontier worlds, one mission at a time. And if trouble found them again, as it inevitably would in the dangerous borderlands of the outer sectors, she knew they would face it together, the intelligence officer and the engineer, combining her training and his insight into a partnership greater than the sum of its parts. They had survived the Desolation Belt. Whatever came next, they would be ready, not with weapons aimed at distant targets, but with minds open to the patterns that connected all things, even those that seemed most alien and incomprehensible. For in understanding those patterns lay the true power, the power not just to survive, but to transform the very nature of the conflict itself. As Corin had demonstrated in the desert, when you truly understand your opponents, you don't need to aim. They will position themselves exactly where they need to be.